All right, here we are. Namaste, my friends. And this is episode number 15. You'll notice that I put a big number 15 on the title screen because I took a couple days off. I just needed a break from the studio, so I took a couple days off. And, sometimes things from our childhood, it gets the best of it. I don't know that my family ever considered it, the Protestant work ethic, but a lot of times with my clients, I find myself talking about this idea that has been drilled into our heads that you have to work hard, you have to be, and all of that is well and good, until it's kind of at the expense of, living and enjoying life. And so it was a struggle for me to just say, you know what, I'm going to take 2 days off because I had done this 14 previous episodes. And when I decided to do that, that tape, that replaying of my childhood kind of stepped in and tried to kick my ass. No, you can't do it. You can't skip a day. You got to do it every day. You got to do it, And luckily, I hope most of us have learned to steer clear of some of these absolute ideas that we tend to put on ourselves. So anyway, so here we are, episode number 15, and we're talking about Adam and Eve today. And I just have some observations on Adam and Eve. So continuing my practice of when something catches your attention, sometimes it's valuable just to kind of hang out with the idea and see where it leads you, see what comes up. And so I've been struggling with, or this is the page, we're still on page 2, but this idea of Adam and Eve, and sometimes we look at Adam and Eve as being the prototypical first humans. And I'm not too sure that that's a great idea. And so in a way, I'm going to, again, take this approach that the literal is the most simple understanding. And I'm probably not, I know I'm not going to gain any points with individuals who believe that, Adam and Eve were the first human beings and God created them in 7 days and things like that. There's a lot of truth in those stories, but I have a lot of questions about Adam and Eve, these first beings, and I'm not even too sure that I want to attach the qualifier human beings to Adam and Eve. And so hopefully this will make sense what I'm thinking, and then we'll just kind of keep unpacking this as time permits. But it seems to me that when we look at the literal story of Adam and Eve, and then when we look at the scientific explanation of the first human beings, and we consider that it might be a combination of the two, that perhaps literally God may not have said, spoken Adam into existence, or spoken Eve, or, the process of the story that you can look at, that perhaps Adam and Eve are simply archetypes of the first beings on the planet. And maybe I can even say the first conscious beings on the planet, conscious enough to realize that they had a choice to have their eyes open or continue to live with their eyes closed, which of course is the eating of the fruit. And we don't see the other organisms that have either evolved up to this point or have been created up to this point, because it's kind of interesting because even the creation of the different organisms tends to follow what the what evolution would teach in terms of how the different categories of organisms developed. And Adam and Eve were the first beings. So if we take that approach, here's, I guess, some observations that I have. First of all, can we consider them the first human beings? Well, I'm not too sure that any of us would be who we are today without having had the experiences that a true human being would have. Birth. Adam and Eve did not experience birth. Adam and Eve did not experience the first 4.5 years of life, which, as I teach my developmental psychology students, you have something called infant amnesia. You do not remember your existence before about 4.5 years of age. You might have a sense of how those years played out, but we know at least, or at least we think neurologically, that you do not have the neurological capacity to remember anything before about 4.5 years of age. So they haven't had that experience of infant amnesia. They haven't had that experience of coming out of infant amnesia at the age of 4.5, 5 years old, and suddenly wanting to investigate the world. They haven't had that experience. They didn't have the experience of being a toddler. They didn't have that experience of every year being a few inches taller and getting a brand new perspective on life. The thing that just flashed through my mind is, the toddlers that when they learn how to walk, they're trucking and run. They're trucking around the house, and they think they can clear the kitchen table, or they think they can clear the kitchen counter, but they don't. So they catch one right in the forehead. Well, it's because they haven't learned, that there's a few more inches of human being above your eyes. So it's just, I enjoy thinking about, how do children perceive the world? But Adam and Eve did not have any of these experiences. I mean, holy cow, most significantly, Adam and Eve were never teenagers. They never experienced puberty. Talk about an experience that is pretty intense, going through puberty and having questions every day. How do I measure up? Do I compare? Am I doing things right? Who am I? It's just a period of change. And Adam and Eve never had that experience. I jokingly say, and I've heard this said, so I'm stealing this, but I jokingly say Adam and Eve did not have belly buttons. If we're to believe the literal story, then Adam and Eve had no need of a belly button because they didn't experience birth. So I know that's just a weird sideline, but so Adam and Eve, they are the first beings who understood good versus evil, who understood the choice that they had to live life fully awake or to live life unconscious as determined by what they did with the piece of fruit. And they didn't have this experience. They didn't have their first gods that we talked about in a previous episode. They didn't have the chance to be born and to understand that we have limits in our human existence and we need to have some sort of God, some sort of connection. And so we know that infants, in their own way, they pray. An infant in a crib that needs to be changed or is hungry and needs to eat, their shouting out is basically a prayer of sorts. And what they learn very quickly is that if I cry, if I express that I have needs, very limited needs, but if I express that, my first gods show up in the form of my caregivers or my mom or dad or both my mom and dad, but somebody shows up, miraculously. And developmentally, we at least think that when the parent leaves the room, that in the child's mind, the parent is gone. The parent no longer exists. And it's just kind of some interesting things. So that's all I want to cover today. That's really short and sweet, but we're already at almost 9 minutes. So we're going to continue to investigate this idea of the first humans. So maybe some additional thoughts on Adam and Eve. And then we're going to go to who I think it makes more sense to consider the first actual human beings, which would be Cain and Abel, who did have that experience of parenting and discovering who they are. And just the interesting lessons and observations we can make through what I will also consider the first true sin of humanity, which was actually a murder. So we're going to talk about that as well. All right. Namaste, my friends. Oh man, I had this cool diagram. I had this cool picture. Well, I'll let it go like 20 more seconds so you can look at this etching that I found with Adam and Eve with no belly buttons. All right. Namaste, my friends.